So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to welcome you for this 11th edition of the Community of Users on Secure, Safe and Resilient Society. We will have a very, very dense program all the week with different themes being discussed, a lot of synergies, a lot of actors being gathering here, different policymakers, scientists, practitioners, industry SMEs. So today we have a plenary session that will set the general framework for our discussion all the week. And it's my great pleasure to invite the three speakers for the opening address. First of all, my director, Matthias Hull. I would invite you maybe to sit at the table if you don't mind. And then Johannes Lüchner, who is the director at DG ECO, and Birgit de Boissezon, head of unit at DG Research. And maybe I can, yeah. So, well, Matthias will open this symposium. Thank you very much, Matthias.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is a great pleasure for me to once again address an event organized in the framework of the community of users. And why is it so? It is so because the community of the users is an indispensable forum to help better linking security research to practical needs and use. And let me stress 3 points which underline this and your importance. First, the community of users is a growing network of now 1,700 registered members that brings together all relevant stakeholders with respect to security research. This shows, secondly, that this network contributes to the truly needed integrated approach on the user side. And finally, also on the side of the Commission, the CoU is contributing to a collegial effort involving different DGs and agencies. 3 of this week's thematic workshops are chaired by DG ECO and DG RTD, which are warmly thanked for their active participation and involvement in the preparation of this event. And let me also say that other policy DGs are representing, showing the institutional character of the CoU exchanges. Ladies and gentlemen, not least due to the increasing number of terrorist attacks and natural and man-made disasters, the importance of security research has over the last years significantly increased. And the Commission has acknowledged this development in its proposal for a multi-annual financial framework for the next financial period of 2nd May this year. It envisages a strong reinforcement of the activities related to security and specifically to border management. And the relevance of research is being confirmed by an increase of the overall budget dedicated to research to 97.6, so close to 100 billion euros. And as such, this budget will be the biggest ever research and innovation funding program we had. Just to compare, the 97.6 billion euros to the H2020, which was 77 billion euros. And as regards to the 9th framework program, the Commission proposal is envisaged to be adopted by the College this week. And let me stress now one very important point, and this is an important point because we are meeting here today and in the context of the MFF and the FP9 proposals of the Commission. The upcoming new financial period, and in particular the upcoming program phase for the FP9, provide a unique opportunity to make the best use of our different roles in order to reach the best possible use of our funds. So I can only appeal to all of us to join our forces to make the best out of this chance in the upcoming months. As policymakers in the Commission, we need to take care that this increased amount of public money available for research is invested as usefully as possible. In general, it is clear that the investment approach must be threefold. First, it needs to be focused on major societal and industrial challenges, such as security and climate change, topics which are addressed in this week's thematic workshops. Second, the business environment must be made more innovation-friendly and less risk-averse. And this was suggested in the previous CoU meeting when discussing the better use of pre-commercial procurement and public procurement of innovative solutions. And third, it must be effective in supporting our efforts at all stages, from prevention to preparedness, detection, and response. Having said this, these general objectives will not be sufficient. To maximize the impact of research, a continuous and close involvement of all actors needs to be established, first to help identity needs, second to define research requirements, third to shape research projects, and fourth to enable the uptake of research output along the needs. We must involve all actors. The first group of actors, which is key for our strategic orientation, are the practitioners. We need to continue existing and establish further communities of practitioners that are able to systematically structure and consolidate user responsiveness at European level. 5 of these networks on police, this applies to 2 networks, firefighters, CBRN testing centers, and the Danube region have already started in 2017. And 5 more practitioners networks are ready to start in the upcoming months, and they are focused on medical emergency, Mediterranean region, the Arctic region, customs, and explosives. The objective of these networks is to provide us with research priorities for the mid to long term by monitoring projects of strong and concrete added value in terms of development of tools and services to be used in the daily life of the different end users. In addition to these practitioners networks, EU agencies such as Europol and Frontex, or is now called the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, can play also a significant role in the research project cycle by assessing and aggregating the needs of end users, such as police and border guards, also by feeding them into research programming and helping to ensure that research applications are procured and used on the ground. The Commission has therefore proposed to include articles into the new mandates of these 2 agencies, allowing them to also become active in the research area. And for the EPCGA, or former times Frontex, this article is already in force, and we will make use of the competence and the expertise of these agencies. Furthermore, we should not work in silos when technical expertise and creativity are needed to generate innovative solutions. We are therefore currently internally reflecting on how to better and more systematically bring into the equation scientists, researchers, academics, as well as the industry. And let me also say that, and I said in the presence of Mr. Venturoni, who will shortly address this forum as well, without industry's involvement, innovative solutions will stay commercially unexploited and will not reach the markets, and hence they will not reach the practitioners either. Ladies and gentlemen, even if we manage to make best use of the expertise of all the mentioned stakeholders in an integrated approach, a further challenge remains. And this is the challenge of communication. Too often, security research results are not communicated and or disseminated amongst the communities which could either bring them to the market or make the use of them on the ground. It is for these reasons that the Security Research Event 2018, which is our annual conference, on 5 and 6 December in Brussels, will discuss how to better communicate in order to narrow the gap between security research and practical use. And let us use the opportunity of preparing the implementation of the next framework program to improve the cooperation of all stakeholders and to commonly tackle the challenges and deficiencies identified above. Let me finally come to some further announcements. It is worth to anticipate that the Security Research Event 2018 in December will not only provide the overarching umbrella for the 12th CoU meeting in the same week, but will also function for a back-to-back meeting with the International Forum to Advance First Responders Innovation, which is currently chaired by the European Commission. The link of the activities of the International Forum to Advance First Responders Innovation with a community of users contributes that, on the one hand, research priorities in the area of first responders in the EU are reflected in the global research orientation, and that, on the other hand, the EU better takes into account the global state of the art on first responders innovation internationally. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the event of this week will emphasize on achieving a higher level of protection and resilience against disasters by preventing or reducing their effects and by fostering a culture of prevention. Also in this context, I would like to stress the high level of interactions among various research projects managed by DG RTD, by DG Home, by the REA agency and the ASME, with poly-DGs in the area of disaster risk reduction. Many projects are indeed contributing to the knowledge base required for the implementation of the Union Civil Protection Mechanism and, at international level, the Sendai Framework for Action. This will be detailed by my colleagues Johannes Luchner and Birgit de Roy-Sesson, I hope that was correct, as well as a UN representative. Let me therefore now, without further ado, give the floor to my colleague Johannes Luchner, who is director at DG ECHO. But first, let me wish you fruitful discussions in the upcoming meetings and workshops, and I hope to see you soon again. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Johannes Luchner. I'm Director for Emergency Management, so I'm more a practitioner than a researcher. And while we deal in emergency management also with specific security incidents, the main part of our work relates to natural disasters and pandemics like Ebola, for instance. What I will do is simply reflect on where research in particular is of interest to us, how it influences our work, and how important it is to communicate well on it. I discover from time to time very, very interesting projects, but by coincidence rather than due to strategic communication. Now, our commitment to tackling disasters and reducing disaster risk is basically enshrined in our commitment to make Europe a safer place, a place that protects its citizens. And there's already one aspect of our work where better research could help us, and that is on loss data. We have better data on economic losses than on the losses in human life, unfortunately, which I always find rather strange. But we know that since 1980, for instance, EU member states have lost over 360 billion euros in weather and climate-related events. That's about 80% of, more than 80% of the total disaster losses that we know of. As you know, last year in particular, we had a particularly bad fire season, which in Portugal alone cost more than 100 lives and an estimated more than €500 million in economic losses. One area where research will be very interesting for us, and already is how these risks spread. If you look at the data on wildfires over the last 30 days, you will realize that it's burning in Northern Europe, in the United Kingdom, in Sweden, in Norway, at a level that is unexpected to the authorities there. Now, being at the front line of disaster management has one big advantage, and that is that you focus all the remaining time on prevention and preparedness. We have to do more on prevention and preparedness, and we have to do better on prevention and preparedness, not only internationally, but also inside the European Union. We have, of course, made progress over the last years. Member states today collectively and the European Union as such are definitely better prepared, have definitely invested a lot in prevention, but we notice that some gaps continue to exist, particularly if European countries are hit by simultaneous disasters, as was the case last year with the forest fires. We notice now in our Ebola response, not for the first time, but again, that there too, when it comes to pandemics, there are certain gaps in terms of assets that are ready to deploy. Now, we in the Commission have been advocating disaster risk reduction for a number of years now. We support in particular in DG ECHO the implementation of the Sendai framework. We have developed an EU Sendai action plan with contributions from 15 different services. We really make sure that disaster risk reduction is being mainstreamed in all kinds of policies, and that goes even as far as the financial sector. And we have funded numerous disaster risk reduction programs in EU member states, the EU neighborhood, and continue to do so in developing countries. In November 2017, the Commission has made a proposal called RESC-EU, which is a proposal on strengthening the European Union civil protection mechanism. There we propose to procure at EU level, to mobilize at EU level, assets that are missing, and that's the response part, that's the solidarity part. But we put equal, if not more, emphasis on the part that we call responsibility, in other words, adequate prevention and preparedness measures by our member states. We are currently negotiating that proposal, but it is clear that both in the European Parliament and in EU member states, the balance of importance between the two issues is the same as ours. In other words, we need to maybe not invest more, but certainly invest better in prevention and preparedness, so that all of our member states are at least prepared for the average risk they're facing, and that we have additional last resort reserve capacities at European level. What we want to do in particular with regards to member states is to make sure that investments that are co-financed by the European Union's budgets are part not only of a regional or local development plan, but are part of a larger prevention, preparedness, and response plan, of a risk management plan. That is our idea. We will see how this is taken up by Council and the European Parliament. There is, of course, a close cooperation between civil protection and security, but I will not hide from you that, of course, in this area, cooperation is slightly more difficult because security matters are regarded as a national prerogative, and we are not sure that we always have all the information on the prevention and preparedness measures out there. When we discuss with civil society, when we discuss with local authorities, for instance, mayors whose communities host nuclear power plants across the European Union, we realize also that there might be certain gaps in information, in availability of information. However, civil protection services provide a first response also to CBRN attacks in many of the European Union's member states, some of them embedded in military services, some of them embedded in civil protection services directly. Civil protection also has the task of organizing evacuations, in particular mass evacuations, which is also a subject that we are discussing intensely with member states. Because, for instance, in the area of emergency shelter, we also think that there are certain gaps in certain countries that need to be filled, but we also need realistic scenarios on which to base our estimates of asset needs. And then, of course, we are discussing, and there the discussion is very, very frank and very open, discussing on how to intervene in terrorist attacks. And when I say in terrorist attacks, I mean during the attack and not only after, how we can prepare. And there we have made considerable progress simply in bringing authorities from member states together to discuss the right place of civil protection services in such incidents, which are a huge challenge in particular for the health services. Now, last not but least, because that's the subject on the role of research and innovation. As I said, we are practitioners. We work very, very closely with the Joint Research Center, with DGRTD. What we see is the results, and very often there are research projects out there which respond to a need that I don't even know I have until I see the project, and then realize, wow, this would be a great thing to have. It is also one of the major added value elements that we can bring to our colleagues in member states. We have been, therefore, a user of project results of Horizon 2020 Security Research Strand. We've also provided input into the projects. We are a keen, strong, and long-standing supporter of the Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Center, which provides us with an overview of the research results, which provides us access to networks such as this one, and offers opportunities for cross-sectoral cooperation, of which we need more, not less. On the innovation side, if you go to our Emergency Response Coordination Center, our operational heart, you see the results of research on the screens. We use on a daily basis a European forest fire information system. We use on a daily basis a European floods system. We use a global disaster alert and coordination system to follow up on hurricanes, storms, earthquakes, and so on. We will now, with RescEU, have to develop these instruments further to get more granularity. We have proposed that we, at European level, should be the ones who mobilize reserve capacities. In order to do so, we need better and granular information, in particular on what is happening at local and regional level, but also about potential losses in life and economic losses, because it will be on that basis that you can decide where you use scarce resources, particularly if there are competing demands for these resources. So this research for us is not only operationally important, it is politically crucial. We are also working together with others on innovative solutions. I mentioned only one which we are particularly interested in, and that is insurance. Insurance as a disaster risk reduction and early response tool. We believe that insurance can be a very, very strong incentive to make sure that your disaster risk reduction, prevention, and preparedness policy are improved. And we are working, and we are very interested on an increased use of data, such as the work of the EU Lost Data Working Group, and in future also the use of artificial intelligence. Now, in conclusion, we will be present throughout this community of user meeting. We will also contribute more to one specific day. But the important thing for us is basically to listen and to write down where we think that research can make specific contributions to the tasks we're working on. Thank you very much.
Let me now invite Ms. Birgit Boisson, who's head of unit in DGRTP 1, to address the
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, my director, Jack Mette, regretted that he couldn't be with us here today, but he's in another continent just now, so it was not really possible, and he asked me to present him today at this particular meeting. And it's a pleasure to me, yes, smaller one, thank you. It's a pleasure that I'm joining you here today at the opening session of the 11th Community of Users on Security, Safety and Resilient Societies. I should like to pick up a bit on the situation that was already mentioned about the forest fires. Because last year we saw really dramatic and devastating fires in southern Europe with losses of many lives, as we heard, and economic and ecological disasters. And all this showed that our societies today are quite vulnerable. But they also demonstrated how important collaboration is at European, national and local levels and between various sectors, actors and services to actually be able to prevent or be prepared or to respond to these disasters. At our level, in RTD, and since the first mega fire in Portugal broke out last year in June, we stepped up work to make research and innovation results on forest fires contribute to real-life solutions, as we just heard. Unfortunately, it's not always the case and to the extent we could wish. So we commissioned a review of projects on forest fires and set up a steering committee composed of eminent scientists across Europe and of all relevant commission services to prepare for a multi-stakeholder workshop in Lisbon in February this year. And I take this opportunity to actually thank all the services that contributed so well and in a coordinated way to this, the success of this workshop. And it was quite clear that the success of this workshop was due to several factors, but all of them related to collaboration across established borders. Whether we are talking about collaboration among scientists across Europe and even worldwide, of involvement of all relevant stakeholders, and here we talk about scientists, public authorities, practitioners, but also even, in this case, victims of the fires. We discussed there the entire disaster cycle, so not just parts of it, which is typically done depending on the competence of the different services or actors involved. And as I said already, also not least in collaboration with all the different commission services involved, so we could work towards that common goal in a coordinated and integrated manner. This type of collaboration across borders should in the future be the rule rather than exception in all matters related to response and prevention of disasters. Since the beginning, European research has demonstrated the important added value and synergies it can bring within the scientific communities themselves. But it's today obvious that important challenges are addressed at the European scale also in cooperation and collaboration with all the key actors of the disaster cycle. Since decades, framework programs have promoted such partnerships between scientists and other actors. For example, by enabling stakeholders to be on board research projects and commit to make results useful, usable and innovative and available for practitioners. The Community of Users and the Knowledge Center for Disaster Risk Management can both play an important role to stimulate the use and uptake of research results and innovation. And the community of users in particular is certainly a good way to build up new type of networking among different actors and to stimulate new ways of thinking and collaboration. Indeed, knowledge transfer very often is made through people, through human beings. It's not made through databases, but databases can be very helpful all the same. So among Commission services, DG Research and Innovation and DG Home have collaborated within the research agenda related to natural hazards with a kind of task sharing that reflects the services' respective competences. In the disaster cycle, research and innovation was always, or very often at least, focused on the pre-hazards and disasters event related to prevention or the understanding of the different phenomena. DG Home dealt with the crisis management aspects, the interaction during the crises between the different actors on the field, and post-crisis aspects. An excellent complementarity was built in this context and should be continued also in a wider collaboration framework. So while capitalizing on and building on the successes and knowledge created through the 7 EU research framework programs in the past, we are now implementing Horizon 2020 and across the different pillars of it: excellent science, industrial leadership, and delivering solutions to societal challenges. New ideas are emerging from different fora, requiring more challenge or demand-driven or solution-oriented approaches in research and innovation. The response to challenges or demands needs to be effective and sustainable. Novel ways of including users and relevant stakeholders in the problem identification and possible responses are now explored. New public-private partnerships and new governance schemes now represent possible options that need to be implemented. Within the climate and environmental societal challenge of Horizon 2020, we position our research and innovation agenda as resolutely transdisciplinary, adopting a systemic approach and making use of demonstration projects acting as living labs. This week will bring not only a rich program in terms of the community of users, it will also bring, as it was already mentioned, the Commission proposal for the new framework Horizon Europe, which will be published on the 7th of June. And I'm happy to say that disaster risk reduction and resilient and secure societies will have a prominent role also in that new program. But I also echo the wish to actually use all the instruments across the EU to actually make these this preparedness, this risk reduction effective. After the publication of the proposal, of course, negotiations with Parliament and Council will start, but we will also start more detailed programming of what should be more precisely in part of the implementation of those programs. Now, reverting to the program in this context, I would like to make a bit of publicity of a couple of events that are organized in particular by Research and Innovation. On the 6th of June, we have 2 parallel sessions on Theme 9, Extreme Weather and Climate Events, and on Theme 10, Geological Hazards. In both cases, the multi-stakeholder approach is promoted, as well as research and innovations project contribution, both to policy implementation and to policy design. So this is really an excellent occasion to actually go and find out what's happening in the research world. So a common joint session will set the scene, chaired by the Horizon 20 project Placard, which aims to share knowledge and enhance the collaboration between climate change adaptation and the disaster risk reduction research, policy and practice communities. Here we can discover, for example, the Horizon 20 insurance project that provides this perspective of the insurance sector, as we also heard so importantly, covering both extreme events and geological hazards. This project combines climate services and damage and loss information to provide a standardized catastrophe and climate extremes risk assessment framework. There is also the Citizen Observatory project, We Observe, that will highlight the role that citizens can play in this field. Theme 9 on extreme weather and climate events will be devoted to 3 core panels. It will address extreme events both today and under a future warmer climate. The Paris Agreement sets out a global action plan to put the world on track to avoid dangerous climate change by limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. However, the projections based on current emission trends point to much more substantial warming. This panel will explore these high-end scenarios, in particular the impacts associated with extreme events and the implications for adaptation actions with a focus on impacts. So there are 3 panels in there. One is on high-end climate change, where you hear from the projects Helix and Impressions. The second one is on coastal threats and hydrological extremes, and there will be a number of projects there too. And the third one will be on forest fires, heat waves, and health, where we'll hear from a number of cross-cutting projects also. On Wednesday afternoon, a presentation of a review of the forest fires projects funded by the EU that I mentioned in the beginning will shed the light on the role of research and innovation in advancing the knowledge base, stimulating new management approaches, and strengthening governance in the field of forest fire risk reduction in Europe. The theme 10, geological hazards, will address through 3 panels. First, European research infrastructures. It's indeed important to realize that research infrastructures are not only enabling but also stimulating cross-disciplinary research to better understand, prepare, and answer to geological challenges or disasters, whether earthquakes, tsunamis, or volcanoes. And the EPOS infrastructure, prioritized under the S3 roadmap, will present the services they develop or can offer for a project like SERA or Aristotle. The geohazard supersites will be presented. They are about long-term perspectives and lessons learned from these highly equipped and monitored reference sites supported by research in the Istanbul region, in Napoli, and on Iceland. And thirdly, the tsunamis in Europe will be developed from science to national operational monitoring activities, and there will be projects that show where we stand with our knowledge on how results have been used, for example, to prepare a fully new probabilistic tsunami hazard map, or transferred to the more operational sector like the early warning centers that exist now in the Mediterranean area. Now, last but not least, I was talking about Europe, Horizon Europe coming up, but we haven't finished Horizon 2020 yet. And I would like to mention here the work programs 2018 to 20, where, for example, under the societal challenge, climate action, environment, and resource efficiency, there will be topics of interest in this area, not least on forest fires, risk reduction, but also on multi-risks. They all represent a good opportunity for scientists and users to further collaborate, either within the project proposal or as external stakeholders, following the advancement of the selected projects. I really encourage you, invite you to visit the programs. Several of them are directly related to the core themes discussed on 6th of June. So with this, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I wish you an excellent work during the week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Birgit. Well, I would like to open maybe the floor for 2 or 3 questions, rapid questions, before our speakers leave. Yes.
My name is Jean-Luc Gallat. So we are coordinating eNCircle and eNotice, 2 ongoing Age 2020 project that really try to reach the target practitioners, as you said. My comment is about dissemination, that you say it's not enough dissemination, and we very much agree with that. But dissemination, the best as we can do for the moment is just do what is written in the project, which is totally insufficient to reach the market, and we all agree with that. So one proposal was to integrate new deliverable close to the market or with a high TRL or enough to be demonstrated, to be tested in training center, because we believe the training center is really the cradle where practitioners get the training. And of course, this is not compulsory. On this basis, actual basis, can only be done on, acceptance by other projects, acceptance to be invited and demonstrate. So maybe in the future, in the guidelines for next program, or next research project, it would be good to think about a way to not force people to demonstrate, because this is not the goal, but to kindly invite and suggest that it would be an added value for a project to really integrate demonstration and dissemination in the context of training center, for instance. And by the way, training center and training procedures and new procedures of everything about practitioner, it's a key in the new CBRN action plan. So it makes sense to me.
Yeah, it was less a question, but a comment, and I can fully agree with your comment. First, I really think that it would be a good idea to integrate the projects and the dissemination into training centers. We will take note of that and think about that further. But I think we also, when it comes to communication, we need to think beyond the pure implementation of the project. We need to have more opportunities to exchange views, to exchange best practices, to talk about what has been achieved. And one event is here, this annual conference. I visited for the first time in Tallinn last autumn, and I was really impressed because it is really a kind of forum, a fair exchange of information among all those who are participating in security research. But we are also, as I said in my speech, thinking of further systematizing the work of the practitioners and of the different stakeholders. So we have the conference, which I mentioned, we have all the thematic groups, we have workshops, and we are just thinking about, that we coordinate all this, bring it together, and also bring it then to the higher level in order to really see that we better coordinate and see that we better communicate the results. This is in the making, that's why I can't be more concrete, but we are internally really thinking about that because I think it is absolutely necessary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Monica Buscher. I'm from Lancaster University. Both Mr. Luckner and Mrs. de Boisson spoke about more data and using more data and collaboration and data sharing. But oftentimes, as many practitioners know, that requires much more than technical interoperability and legal interoperability. It also requires social interoperability, if you will, or organizational interoperability. And my question is a bit of a leading question, I guess, is there space for social sciences in the programs to support a better understanding of what social and organizational interoperability means?
I would like to answer that. Yes, basically yes. I think a number of times in my speech I talked about governance, new management modes, etc., etc. And obviously that cannot be dealt with without social sciences. And we have really promoted our activities also across the social sciences community. But it's important also that that community actually thinks in terms of contributing to these matters that seem to be very natural science type things. So yes, I think it's important. It's also important when we actually discuss dissemination and uptake in the broader sense, because you have different ways of doing it, and one way is indeed to include more dissemination and exploitation activities during a project. We have good experience now with what we call the living labs, where you actually have all the actors involved in one project. But we also have good examples with clustering of projects, so it's not just project by project that results are disseminated, but they're seen in a bigger context, and that is a context which is closer to the real world, obviously. So yes, all these could help actually address the question of dissemination and uptake of results.
Thank you. Well, there is, yeah, Johannes, you want to?
Yeah, just very quickly, I would also say yes, if in social sciences, which I suppose you do, you include economics. Give you one example. We have a little bit of research at the international level about the consequences on CO2 emissions of forest fires. Why do I need that? Because I need to convince people that a forest fire in one country has effects on others. Because a forest fire in Greenland, which we had last year, the biggest one that we know of, due to the ash deposit on the ice layer, has immediate consequences on a number of other countries, including the Netherlands. And the Dutch, they know it and they have researched it, because as Greenland rises, the Netherlands will sink a little bit further. But there are a number of areas. One more example, which is very, very important, where we need more research on the relationship between prevention, or the cost benefit of prevention compared to preparedness. Nobody challenges the ratios that are being given in terms of cost of 1:4, 1:7, 1:5. Now, in preparation of our legislative initiative, I asked to see the research. And quite honestly, what you then get is very, very individual, local studies focused on a specific disaster. Although everybody uses and says that in a totally unchallenged way, I think that is another research area where it would be very, very important for us, if we take the major risks facing Europe, what is €1 invested in flood prevention worth in euros saved in response? If we had that across all risk areas, it would be very, very useful to advocate for stronger prevention and preparedness.
Thank you. Well, the last question, please.
Thank you. Patricia Compard, I'm head of I'm chair of CNTC 391, Social and Citizen Security. Most of the issues that you mentioned, especially Mr. Earl and Mr. Luschner, could be solved by using standardization, especially when you mentioned prevention, preparedness, detection, response, or even gathering data, enhancing coordination, exchange of data. I understand that DG ECHO organizes exercises. We don't have a standard on exercises. We could have standards on lesson learned, and in such way be able to gather much more very effective and very fine granularity information, the one that you're missing. So my question is, what else can we do to lead practitioners, people who define and enforce security policies, to go to standardization activities and build on their knowledge and grow and enforce European security through what they already know? Thank you.
In my native language, you have the saying, you run into open doors. So again, I can only agree. I mean, as you might know, the Commission is very much in favor of more standardization, as are the users, as is also industry. I discussed last week with Mr. Venturoni and colleagues about that as well. The problems are on the national level. And in particular, when it comes to security research, I can also understand that for many member states, standardization in our area, in our project, is quite sensitive. So I can only appeal, once again, that we make a common approach there in order to convince colleagues on the national level to more go into that direction. The Commission is doing that. We are just having one dossier on aviation security where we make again the experience how difficult it is with member states to accept more harmonization in this area. So let's join forces and try to work on it, but it will be quite some work to really get to significant results. Thanks.
Yeah, for us the answer is very easy and very similar. If you look at the legal base we have in the treaty, Article 196, it explicitly excludes anything that could lead to harmonization at national level. Now, standardization is not necessarily harmonization, but usually for our member states, when you say standardization, they think you mean harmonization. What we are doing is pointing to the advantages of that and then see whether member states agree. In terms of prevention and preparedness, there is some willingness, apparently, particularly if it reduces the bureaucratic burden of reporting to standardize. But as in security, I think it's a sensitive topic, and it requires a persuasive approach, because that's the only means we have at our disposal. So it's not for lack of willingness, but...
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for your exchanges. Thank you for your very interesting speeches. I would like to free you now, and goodbye to you.
It's hot upstairs.
It's very hot, yeah, I know that. Yeah, it's light. Thank you. I would like to continue this afternoon with our next speaker, who is Virginia Murray from Public Health England. Virginia has been working 9 years at UNISDR, so she will be bringing us to the Sendai Framework for Action. So Virginia, I think you have slides. So if you could display the slides, please. Well, you are bringing a lot of documents, we see.
I'm so sorry. I walk around with a library. It's a huge privilege to be here, Philippe. I love the community of users group. The people I've met here have been inspirational. The work you do is invaluable. And the privilege I have of joining you today to share work about the Sendai framework is a real opportunity to make sure that we're all speaking from the same page and you know what has happened before, so we don't duplicate and we make things better. I work for Public Health England, where I am a public health consultant in global disaster risk reduction. It has given me a huge privilege to meet many and share with many, and I've worked closely with UNISDR between 2008 and 2017, but still am active with them. What I thought we needed to do was just to remind you the purpose of the UNISDR Scientific and Technical Advisory Group. You have a representative here who I will be pointing out. Hard luck, Ian. It's not a holiday today. You will be engaged. And I really wanted to show you that what our purpose is. So it's very much designed to share with you all the idea of substantial technical advice and support in the formulation and implementation of activities to support UNISDR. No, this has slipped. Okay, fine, doesn't matter. That's okay. And basically, the Scientific and Technical Advisory Group was very much part of the network that started really in the 2000s. And we've only really become a group since 2012. But I've been part of it since 2018. We've had a major task, which has been to try and make sure we bring science and technology where possible into policy and try and help inform decision-making. And there are many things we've done, including a long-term 40-year assessment of what might happen in the future. We got this funded through the UK government, looking at the distance of what we had to try and deliver before we got Sendai through. But we've also been very involved in trying to get disaster risk reduction to inform policy and practice. And Ian and I were much engaged with the OECD, things like the International Network for Government Science Advice, and many other groups to try and make sure that your science is used as well as we can. We use the term useful, usable, and used. And finally, there's a lot on capacity building, and I know many of you are interested in that. So I'm going to take you to some of the reports that we have published through the STAG in 2009, in 2013, and 2015. But there are many more out there that we can share, but I just thought it would be important for you to be aware of these. Now, the big thing about science is trying to make sure we are inclusive, and the question from Lancaster very much resonates with me. Thank you for it. Because actually we include all scientists who are engaged in delivering disaster risk management, climate change adaptation in the group. And it is not only natural hazard scientists, it's not only those who work in engineering and technology, in healthcare, but we're very concerned about making sure we include agricultural scientists, social scientists, and the humanities. Otherwise, we'd never remember what had happened without really good humanities. So a lot of this is really important about how we bring everybody together in science, and that has been a really rich exercise in inclusion, not exclusion, working with you, not in silos. Now, to me, 2015 was a magical year. We were so lucky not only to have the Sendai framework with its decades of work to deliver it coming through, which was so important in 2015 in March, but we also then had the climate change agreement and indeed the sustainable development goals, all things that matter together. But interestingly enough, these voluntary agreements are really quite worrying because they don't have any legal legs to stand on. Although they go to the heads of state, trying to make sure the heads of state actually deliver on them is of real concern. So we in the health domain are very lucky that we have the international health regulations. And these regulations are agreed and are legally binding through the World Health Organization. Very important when you consider things like epidemics, pandemics, and for now, again, Ebola. I don't know how many of you have been involved in negotiations, but Ian and I were. It was quite an experience. I was merely an observer through the scientific group. Ian was working for the European Commission. And the whole idea of this incredibly rich negotiation that went on, where each state asked for things that they really cared about, and the words were carefully considered and thought about, ended up, of course, with the Sendai framework. I'm sure you all know the Sendai framework, don't you? Is there anybody who doesn't? I do have a spare copy or two, because hopefully it will be a useful resource for you in delivering the work that you do with Philippe and the community of users. You need to remember that there is one global outcome, 12 guiding principles, 4 priorities for action, and most importantly, 7 targets and indicators, which really matter, with 38 indicators underneath them that are really of concern. Of these, you will note that the mortality and affected people section, which is so important for the Commission that was discussed just now, that we might be able to do the economic losses, but we can't necessarily do the people impacts well, is something that every government is trying to put their heads around to try and deliver on. Difficult situations, because none of us can quite agree on, for instance, how do you define a death from a disaster clearly? So from the science point of view, there's this real call that there's a substantial reduction of disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods, and health, being a healthy person. I was thrilled health was there. We actually got a real science in there, in the economic, physical, social, cultural, and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries. Really critical, with our 4 priorities for action, which include understanding risk, governance, investing, and responding to, absolutely vital at local, national, regional, and global levels. Science is totally embedded in the whole story, and I, having had time to sit there, decided to paint in yellow how much science there was. And you notice we're not short. In fact, science has such an enormous role to try and influence how we implement this framework. It is a real privilege to be a scientist, I believe. So what does science have to do? Well, we have to enhance the scientific and its technical work. In disaster risk reduction, it's mobilization through the coordination of existing networks and scientific research institutions. And of course, the wonderful thing is that we have the Joint Research Centre and many networks inside the European community and beyond. And that is the purpose of STAG, to pull these together. There's things like bringing in the evidence base, scientific research on patterns, causes and effects, disseminate risk information, just as you've asked for. This is what the member states asked for. Making sure we apply science and technology to decision-making where we can, provide post-disasters reviews and disseminate studies, things that really matter to us all. Now, the first post-2015 UN meeting was in 2016, and it was all about how we get science to implement the Sendai framework. And I had the great privilege of being the chair of the organizing committee. And that was a huge resource that we pulled together and had over 1,000 people. And Philippe, you were absolutely key in that meeting. You brought so much to it with your community of users and all the people who engaged to help us to deliver what was needed. The outcome was a roadmap that was really useful. I just show you tiny bits of the roadmap so you get an idea of the types of calls that we've got. So we have things like a global database of existing hazards, exposure and vulnerability to build awareness, knowledge of changing disaster risk, better disseminate risk information, reduce public health emergencies, all the way through to promote a scientific focus on emerging disaster risks and public health threats. All these things that really matter, that are quite hard to tie down, but incredibly important that we achieve. Being a scientist, of course, and being a nerd that I am, I knew that we had to write and produce very quickly a peer-reviewed paper which documented this conference and was published in an accessible way for scientists, because I don't think many scientists look at the UN frameworks or even look at UN meeting outputs. So we published this paper within 2 months with 100 contributing authors, and there were many points, 12 in particular, but the one that I think really matters here today from Philippe's question to us is the need for a formal national DRR science, national focal point of some sort, of how we bring the science together with those people who make decisions. In the UK, we have a mechanism of government chief scientific advisors, and in the European Commission, I know that we've had great privilege in working with you on this, and hopefully will do in the future, in one way or another, to try and bring this together. We've just had the second meeting, which was held in Tokyo in November last year, and although we have a draft statement, I'm not going to separate it out for you because it hasn't been finalized, but there was a real call for synthesis and much more making data accessible, as was asked for, so thank you for that question. But Asia has been remarkable. Asia has been leading on how we get an Asian focus on science and technology, really critical. They produced a report in 2016, which was trying to measure the science within each country that they investigated. They also produced a report in 2018 just now, which was giving lots of case studies. What they have done, though, is just held their second science conference, where we have been working across the piece with all the different engaging partners, from policymakers to government ministries to scientists to those who actually are the practitioners. And it was a really rich meeting, and there was a huge amount that came out of it. And I hope that we'll be able to model that in Europe. So this new scientific and technical advisory group has been announced, and I'm very glad to say that last year, Ian, I think it's time you stood up. Just wave to people. Go on, Ian. So Ian is one of our 2 representatives from Europe, and it's wonderful to have him with us today, but also to know his huge leadership in trying to engage with all the European networks. So the European scientists convened in Bulgaria recently. There was a press release about this. We now have, I think it's approximately 20-odd who are on the network. I have a list here if you want to see, so you can talk to people yourselves and get engaged if that's what would help you. And we know that this is an outcome from the Istanbul conference last year that was held, where we had a very positive and exciting statement, which was in March 2017, where there would be an initiative to develop a science and technology alliance or network to enable the use of science in the implementation of the Sendai framework agreed. This was the only development initiative that was agreed last year, and it's wonderful that it was for science. So it's a real privilege that you're all here and engaged, and you're seeing that your work is really regarded as so hugely important. There's another meeting coming up in June, which I know Sebastian was very anxious I shared with you in Armenia. It does include science and technology. If any of you can get there, I think you should try. But the one that you really need to go to, if you possibly can, is going to be held in November on the 21st to the 23rd in Italy, and it would be wonderful to have you represented there wherever you could be. So the European Forum has put out strong messages about what might be needed. They have a network, they produced a roadmap, and the roadmap focused really on two different things. One was making sure that we delivered target E, which is the global target on national and local strategies for disaster risk reduction. So how do you have risk assessments? How do you plan for these things? And it's a really important process, because I know that in the European Commission there has been much work going on with your member states, but we need to remember that Europe is at least 53 countries that network together, and we need you all to contribute. We are also very interested in making sure that we look at disaster risk reduction across all the scenarios, and with climate change and extreme events on Wednesday, it's very applicable. So you all know things like this: likelihood and impact. What's going to happen now? What might happen in 5 years? How bad will the impact be? There have been many ways of trying to assess them. Colour has been used, all sorts of different things. But we now know that we have proper guidance to take this forward. So the proper guidance is on the website. It looks like this. It takes you through all the different mechanisms, and it's really for policymakers who need to work with scientists to try and do this. For us, it's a really important mechanism that we use, because we know that the Sendai framework asks us to address all hazards. But what are all hazards? So we've been thinking about this very hard, and there are many ways we could describe it, but this might be a useful way of looking at images that help you to take to an all hazards process. It could be financial shock. Well, we know that the 2008 problems that we had with the financial shock had tremendous impact on health systems because there was less money to invest in them. And there was less money to invest in many other things. So the consequences of these shocks go on for many times. But we're also concerned about political violence. Just think about the fact that we were looking only yesterday at a year since our stabbings in London, on London Bridge, and we were having our memorial. And of course, Liège last week. In fact, it's happening everywhere. We are all vulnerable, and it's difficult to plan for. And after all the messages from our wonderful DG directors, we know security is very important. Many of you will focus on technological catastrophes, but we're as concerned about climate, natural, and of course infectious diseases. But I wonder how many of you thought about solar mass ejections and the impact upon power. But the bit that I really like in this diagram is, frankly, what else? We don't know. So we need to be as open as possible and as flexible as we can be to try and make sure we consider that. And for us in the UK, it certainly includes cyber, particularly as we've had so many dramas with our cyber systems. So we publish a national risk register. It doesn't look very pretty, but it's all available. But when you open it up, it's full of colour. You might like to have a look at it. You might like to see what's in there. And you'll obviously see how it links to all the different mechanisms we have. A resource that I think is very useful and has certainly been highlighted in the National Disaster Risk Assessment Guidance from UNISDR. And if we can help you to deliver that, we would be delighted to try and support you in your scientific mechanisms to do this type of work. Now, with climate change being so critical, and I've just been in the Pacific, where the European Union has been brilliant in supporting things, We know you have several projects there in the small island developing states and on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. We know that IPCC has had a huge global impact on how governments think. So this report, of which I was the first author of one of the 9 chapters, has had a tremendous impact, but there are many more coming through. And linking to high-quality scientific reports like this, I think, are very important. And this is our privilege of being scientists to be able to volunteer to contribute. But there are other things that we've been doing, including something that I would like to commend the Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Centre for, published last year, Knowing More, Losing Less. Something that's very important, but now we've got the next version that's going to come through for 2020, and I don't know how many of you are involved in that, but just to bore you, here's a spreadsheet. The opportunities to engage are there, and I think it's important that if you're interested in doing this, to support the incredible work that the Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Centre are taking forward is very useful. But there are other things like counting on the world. Sitting inside the UN's Sustainable Development Solutions Network on data, we've had a great privilege in trying to engage on making sure we understand how data can be managed. And I think that's a real priority. And some of those questions on data we've had already in the questions are really important. Thank you. Keep asking them, please. And I just thought, because NACTEC is such an important area for the STAG, for the UNISDR STAG, they would like to know that we've just published through WHO something that I've been much involved with, which is chemical releases caused by natural events and disasters, along with others like Elizabeth in trying to deliver this. But it's this networking of changing, cascading risks that are so important. So what else have we been doing? Well, capacity building. So many of you are engaged in this, and I said I would almost end on this, because I think capacity development is really critical. The new report from the conference we had in March has just come through as I was sitting at my desk, just here at the table, and we know there's some exciting things that are going to be happening. We know capacity development is not something that's going to fit within the Sendai framework timeline, and many of you have PhD students who need to be helped to deliver this in the future. But we also need a system for accreditation of our wonderful scientists. We need them to be recognized as uniquely qualified in delivering disaster risk reduction, disaster risk management, and climate change adaptation where we can. I wonder if we can take that forward somehow. So finally, to me, the Sendai framework provides a method to build research outputs, to enhance capabilities to plan and prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters and other emergencies. What a privilege it is to be here. What a privilege to have the directors from DG helping us to try and think this through, knowing that there's more research funds because they need our help. The Sendai framework helps to frame how we should give that help, because that's what the UN member states want. And finally, to me, it offers an opportunity to engage at a global level with stakeholders on guidance and policy issues that impact both regional and local preparedness. And these few days will help to reinforce our messages and learning. Thank you, Philippe, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Virginia. I think we will take questions later at the end of the 3 speeches, and I would like to invite Stefan Tangen, who will be coming to speak about standardization aspects. He's also representing the International Forum to Advance First Responder Innovation and the Civil Protection Contingency Department. Please. Yeah, they will be coming. Okay.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And also, it's kind of interesting. My subject here has already been starting to pop up here. And I'm not sure about you, but I could feel it in the air. You have the positive things with standardization, but you also have the negative things. And that is something that I'm going to discuss now also. I mean, there is skepticism, but there's also a lot of possibilities with it. And I'm going to give you some of my views. And I've been working with standardization in this field for, I think, almost 15 years now. So mostly through ISO, but of course we have a CEN, the European organization, also working with this. I'm going to start off with actually giving an example, and this example is the worst case example. It's always interesting to present this, and it has nothing to do with disaster risk reduction or security. It has actually to do with cargo security. Up here on the screen, you can see the Swedish national rules on how to secure a load on a truck. As you can see, if we have lashes and try to make sure that the cargo is safe, 2 lashes is enough, according to the Swedish rules. This was almost when I started to work with standardization. There was this initiative in Europe to try to harmonize cargo rules across Europe, because it was being designed very specifically in each one of the countries. So they set up a standardization work to do a European standard on cargo security, and the standard was quite simple. It was just an equation on how to calculate how many lashings you have to use on a cargo. And of course, there are various of cargos and so on, but that was the case that the standard should do. As always, when something happens in a new standardization project starts, the Swedish Standards Institute, which I was working for before, they started to talk to Swedish stakeholders, asking them, do they want to participate in this, or what do they think? Well, we presented it, and they said that, well, in Sweden we're quite happy already with the Swedish rules. So the stakeholders were happy. They saw no reason to participate in a European project on trying to harmonize cargo security rules. Waste of time and money. That was what we heard. At the same time, in Germany, and as you know, Germany is in the map, is in the middle of Europe. It's a transit country with lots of cargo going through it, and they have big problems, especially when accident happens on Autobahn, for example. And the interesting thing there also is that in Germany in itself, they don't use lashing as a cargo security method as much as we do in Sweden. But they do have one thing, and that is many lashing manufacturers. And they raised their hand and said, okay, we like this project, we will lead it. So what do you think happened after 3 years of work when they came up with a standard trying to calculate how many lashings you should use on that cargo? Well, this was the result. No risk. It's a very special. It is a special case, but that is what happened. And of course, you know, if you have all the lashing manufacturers and some other people defining what the standard should be, and all of the stakeholders actually being affected by this, they don't care, you know. So what happened was that CEN published this European standard, and immediately Germany pointed to this standard in their legislation, says this is the law now. So every Swedish truck that has to pass through Germany, and that's quite a lot, had to put on these. And so suddenly the Swedish stakeholder wasn't so happy. And one of my first works, assignments when I started to work with standardization, that was to get rid of this standard. You know how many years that took? 5 years. 5 years it took, and now we actually agreed a little bit later on 2.5 lashing is sufficient. So we got an agreement eventually. But we have to live with that for quite a long time. So what are the conclusions we can draw from this? Well, first, and I think most important here, is that standardization is actually can be a very powerful tool, really powerful tool. You can affect things with it, and especially when you connect it with legislation. And we work with that in Europe. We have standards connected to EU directives, but we also have national legislation that points to standards. So it is a powerful tool. Remember that. Second, when I go to a standardization meeting, I'm there to represent myself and my views. I don't represent your views. I'm not there to do this for the better of the mankind or something like that. And everybody that goes to these meetings are the same. They are there to defend what they believe in. Hopefully we have the good representation so we do something for everybody. But the only person that actually can represent your views, it's yourself. So if you feel that here is a standardization product that will affect you and your organization or your country, you really need to get involved. Otherwise, other people will decide for you. That's just part of the game. So that is something we always have to remember. And then I have my reference to my favorite Clint Eastwood movie here. When we talk about standards, many people come to me and say, well, I have this great idea for a standard. And they talk about some standards. This is a good standard. And they also tell me what a bad standard is. And usually then they focus on the contents. To me, there are good standards, there are bad standards, and there are actually ugly standards. In my view, a good standard, that has not so much to do with the contents. That has more or less to do with, is it actually being used? Has it have an effect? And perhaps in my world, the best standard, not from its contents point of view, but from its effect is 9001. Everybody knows about 9001. It's implemented, millions of organizations use it. That's a good standard. Perhaps there are bad things in it, I don't know, but it is a good standard. But then on the other hand, we have many bad standards as well, and that is that there are lots of standards, especially where you have people that want to quickly do a standard, they gather a few people, they rush things, and they write something, and they publish a document, but nobody uses it. It ends up on the shelf. Numerous of examples of that also. So in my view, the good ones are the one that is being used, the bad one is that people just ignore, and we have many of those. And then, of course, we have the ugly ones, the last. And that is, I would say, the first example that I presented here. And that is, I would describe as that when one kind of stakeholder has had perhaps a too big influence on the standard, so it's not, you don't have that equal representation. Because that, I think, is important. In order to make these good standards with lots of opportunities and possibilities, you need to have all of the stakeholders involved. That is the key. If only one stakeholder sets the standard, it might end up with an ugly one. That causes problem. Well, then we can also discuss what is a standard and so on. I'm not going into the details, but this is my definition of it. And usually I point at a standard is some kind of voluntary agreement. It's not legislation. It can become legislation, but it is a voluntary agreement. And usually I describe it, because there are so many different standards that how something should be designed or how something should be, how to do something. That is typically two things that standards solve. Historically, it started with screws and bolts. Now standardization is so much more on the softer issues and so on. And just within ISO, I think they have published 21,000 standards, something like that. So they are everywhere. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about my own organization. The Swedish Civil Contingency Agency. We are an organization with around 1,000 people. And as I said here, it's all about disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction is kind of a big topic. When we're trying to reduce risk on disaster, we work from various of perspectives. We work with various tools and so on. And that is also what my agency does. If you log onto our webpage, this is how we present our work. But we are a governmental agency responsible for this field, and we try to attack it from many different perspectives. When it comes to what we do on standardization, first of all, I can just say that we are very active when it comes to participating in standardization activities. And we use standards, and we use them in various ways. We have 30 employees participating in technical committees, and I think there are 20 national committees that we participate in that is linked to the things that we do. We work quite strategic on the thing. We have decided what should we participate in, how should we use the standards, and so on. So we have taken a very strategic approach to it. And I did an overview just some months ago, and we have about 70 documents that represent some kind of regulations that we write. And if you look into those legislation, we can see that 50% has reference to standards. And we reference 400 standards. So standards for us is quite significant. An interesting thing when I looked at that was that the cargo security standard, that is one of those 400s that we actually refer to. Of course, also, when we use standards, it's not just legislation. We provide Sweden with lots of guidance documents, and there we point to standards. Then, of course, we have technical systems that wouldn't work without standards. And, of course, also, we are certified to 9001 and 14000, I mean, the traditional management system standards. And then perhaps one of the most interesting things that we have done, and that is that this started several years ago, and it was something that has changed over time, and various committees has merged and so on. But we pick up the role of sharing ISO TC 292 on security and resilience. And that is a committee which actually is one of the biggest committees in ISO, which specifically deals with the topic we are discussing here today. Here's just a picture from our last meeting, and of course, ISO Work International, and this is from Sydney. And I think it's 70 countries that participate in this, and of course, many European countries. And what we have done so far, and we've been working with this quite a lot, here's just a list of the ongoing projects and publications that we have done over the years. And it's quite a lot. I'm not going to go through this list, but I can tell you, we work with terminology issues, we work warning issues, we work on emergency management, we work also on fraud and so on. So a lot of the different things that my agency does, we can do standards on it through this committee. Of course, this committee also have a relations to the European Committee on Security and Citizens Security. Our belief is normally that if something is of global relevance, it should be done through ISO because it concerns the whole world. If something is of particular relevance to Europe, perhaps the CENT committee is the driver for it, but there is also collaboration. A lot of the ISO standards has also been endorsed as European standards. So why did we do this? Because we invest a lot of time in this committee, just sharing it and providing all of the funds for it and being part of it. Well, it was a strategic decision on opportunities. We knew that here we have an opportunity to develop new tools that we will be able to use later on. And most of our core business was covered by the scope of this committee. So for us, naturally, so we pick up this. And of course also, it's when you participate in standardization, especially when you're leading it, this is a platform to discuss with other countries. It is a platform to discuss also with some of the best experts in the world, sharing ideas and so on. And also, it also means, just before we listened to the discussion on the Sendai framework, I mean, through this platform, we can also have links to UN and other organizations that work with this, so we can have discussion and jointly collaborate. Before it's very hot in here, and I know that everybody wants to have coffee soon, so I will just give a short few examples here on how the standards that we have been using then. One of the standards, and it took us 6 years to develop this, and that was, we did a management system standard for business continuity management. Now it's called the 22301, and now it's actually a series of documents which supports this. But it is kind of like the 9001, but when it comes to continuity management. And the way we have used this from our agency is simply that, not in legislation yet, but as a guidance, we say that when we work with critical infrastructure protection, well, we point to this standard and say, this is the tool you should work with. And in order to help out with that, we have also given out handbooks. We have also bought this standard from our National Standards Committee, so we can hand it out for free to some of the people working with critical infrastructure protection. Another example is, let's see here. Okay, this is just a recent work where we collaborate with several UN agencies. And this has a lot to do with the Sendai framework. And the question we are asking ourselves is that, what kind of standards do we need in order to support the Sendai framework? So far, and it's a little bit difficult to work together with UN because ISO and UN has different systems. We work a little different and so on. But the first thing that we have started to discuss, and this is not finished yet, but especially on terminology, how to use terminology and so on in this field. And also we talk about what gaps there are, what standards are needed in order to get the Sendai framework in place. A lot of new fields start with standardization also. I won't go through this, but let's say, for example, the word resilience. I'm sure you have been discussing resilience numerous of times. Nobody knows what it means. Well, through a standard, you can sit down and actually, after a while, you specify something. And so we have one view on what it means and so on. And that became a standard. And also, take a simple question like, if you have an accident, people show up to help. That is a huge problem in Sweden. Not because we don't want people to help, but once somebody shows up to the accident scene and we want them to help us, well, who take responsibility for them? If they die during something, or they hurt themselves, or they destroy something, who has the responsibility and so on for that? What we did, we developed a standard, how to plan to take on spontaneous volunteers. And that is something that we, not yet, but we will refer to that in our guidance when it comes to how to solve that issue. Last but not least here is 31,000. That is one of the biggest sold standards in ISO. It's about risk management. The way we use this, for example, was that there are so many definitions, so many tools when it comes to risk. So it's difficult to decide what to use. Well, once the standard was there, we realized, well, if we have a standard here, we will use that. So when we start to talk risk with our municipalities and so on, well, we always refer to 31,000. That's the way that we will discuss risk. So that's how we started to use it. So my last slide here, and I wouldn't say standardization is an opportunity or a barrier. It can be both. But I think the important question is to ask ourselves, when is standardization an opportunity? Well, standardization itself it's a working method, I would say, that builds on consensus. So when a consensus process is a suitable tool as a working method to define something, then I think standards definitely are the right. Sometimes you need to do legislation, and that is something else, but consensus process is one thing. And also, and I touched upon that before, and that was that in order to actually do a great standard, you need to have the key stakeholders present. It's not enough to have a couple of people just writing something up. You need to have people involved. You need to have organizations respecting various of views. Otherwise, it will become a very limited standard. Standards are voluntary, so there needs to be that kind of solution needs to be what we're aiming for also. A voluntary solution that if we write something good, people that will actually start using it. And last, this is also something that standards are usually criticized. It takes a long time to work with consensus, and it takes a long time to develop a standard. If you need something tomorrow or yesterday, perhaps not standardization is the perfect tool for it. Time cannot be the only factor that is important, because it takes a long time to reach consensus. With that, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Well, we'll take questions, as I said, after Paolo Venturini's presentation. We will guide us into innovation aspects, and then we'll have some few questions before the break, which I think is expected very, very strongly by you, but well, we still have some discussions before this. Paolo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here this afternoon. I'm aware I'm the obstacle between you and the coffee now, so I mean, I will try to be quite to the point and quick. Okay, sorry. Okay, so what I will be presenting today is the view of EOS regarding pathways to innovation in disaster risk management. Okay. EOS, it's an acronym that stands for European Organization for Security, and we represent in Brussels the European security industry and research community. We have over 40 members, which are active in several security domains, which include soft target and critical infrastructure protection, transport security with the focus on aviation, border security, and cyber security. Here you have the logos of our members. So as you can see, we have big companies as a member. We have SMEs, research centers, and all of them are very active in a number of fields with a focus on those that I presented before. So coming to the presentation, this presentation will be focusing on man-made hazards, in particular man-made technological hazards. We are an organization that focuses on security, so this would be our take, our angle to tackle this type of challenges. I will discuss briefly what we think should be the way to approach this type of challenges. We think that we need a comprehensive approach which brings together capability deployment and processes. Processes are very important. They cannot go through separate ways. Talking about capability deployment, we think, okay, the title was Pathway to Innovation. To us, the pathway to innovation is through capability deployment. That's our main point. You will see that we believe that it's very important to take an integrated system approach when developing and deploying capabilities. I will show you a few considerations regarding technology and processes as provided us by our members, and then I will conclude you giving the main points that for us are important when we talk about path to innovations. Okay, as I said, man-made hazards, and we focus on man-made technological hazards. UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, what are technological hazards? Those that originate from technological or industrial conditions, dangerous procedures, infrastructure failure, specific human activities, such as nuclear, chemical, or transport accidents. This is the very core of our activities. As I said, I mean, we will be focusing on the security dimension of these hazards because that's our job, basically. But actually, a lot of these considerations are easily applicable also to safety considerations. What the security angle does is to introduce a higher degree of complexity into the picture because it introduces actually an intelligent malicious element into the equation, into the risk management equation. I spoke before of the need for a comprehensive approach. As I said, managing man-made hazards is as much a matter of deployment of technological solution as it is of processes implementation. A comprehensive approach needs to manage effectively, prevent and recover in an effective way all man-made accidents, and such a comprehensive approach should include, I mean, a model that allows to have an effective risk analysis, to define the solutions, the capabilities, the research gaps that are needed to be filled in order to prevent and protect by such hazards. And finally, what is needed is a an assessment of the whole framework and a validation of the process. In particular, the risk analysis phase is very important. This phase allows us to define priorities according to cost-benefits considerations for capability development and deployment. And this is a key concept for us. There's a strict dependence between the level of security you want to achieve and the budget you have. So they cannot be seen in separation. Of course, it's all a matter of incremental security you want to achieve for an increment in budget. These slides just summarizes what I just said. I mean, it's the comprehensive approach goes through a cycle that starts with the risk analysis, proceeds to the definition and development and deployment of capabilities that can prevent and protect from hazards. Then there's the process of validation of assessment. And this must feed back into the risk analysis process. So it's a continuous process. And as we will see during the presentation, current technology allows us to really fine-tune better and better our responses. Okay, capability deployment. Capability deployment and development, we think, must be approached from a system perspective. We will see better in the next few slides. Taking into consideration a number of factors like the threat, the technological requirements, budgets, and also environmental conditions. There is a difference if you install a system in Finland or you install it in Greece. In the different phases of an accident, it is key to be able to process a vast amount of data if you are to produce reliable and actionable information. This is very important. We are undergoing a digital transformation of security. Data is key. We are producing a lot of data. The key is to transform this data into information which can be used to act and to help the operators on the field. Finally, and this is actually a key word for the European Organization for Security, if you look at this risk management from a security perspective, what is important is to ensure a reasonable degree of European autonomy. Again, this summarizes what I just said, and we need a system integration approach. We have different types of technologies from communications, screening and detection systems, artificial intelligence, and so to be approached through an integrated system framework. Okay, here I have a couple of slides provided by our members that synthesize the technological approach it is necessary to take when tackling this type of risks. These slides must be read bottom up. So we start with the collection of data from a number of sources. We have access control systems, video management systems, we have even cyber, we have radio communication and others. All this data collected by different sources converge and are to be processed, evaluated, and presented in an actionable way to produce the relevant operational picture that is used by the operators on the field to determine their actions. Another example that I have, it's, as I said, I mean, we are a security-focused organization. This slide presents you a particular case where we are to verify if at the custom level there are dangerous materials coming through, like chemicals or radiological materials. So we start with a phase where we collect all the information is available from various sources. We integrate that information with the data we collect by scanning the containers, for example, and using artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques, we can produce actionable information that has been provided by the decision centers to the operators on the field. How the operators act on this information is then fed back into the system and reprocessed by the machine learning algorithms. Machine learning, artificial intelligence is key. I mean, it has been already mentioned in some of the intervention before. I mean, this will be a game changer. This must be very clear. Okay, these are just a few technology and process considerations from us, from some of our members. First of all, as you know, I mean, it's all technology produces false alarms. And alarm resolution takes time, takes resources, and operators on the field cannot evacuate without very good reason. So we need appropriate protocols. Technology must work in different complex environments, as already just said before. We need to conduct regularly verification of compliance and performance monitoring exercises. Staff is key. I mean, it must be properly trained. And finally, and this is another, I mentioned before European autonomy, and that's one very important point for us. And the second one is this one. End users and industry need to work in partnership to optimize the requirement. We, as an industry, do not operate in a vacuum. We are demand-driven. And there's, this I think is a critical point. Many users see industry that operates in the security field as a sort of sellers in a supermarket. It's not like that. Now the security dimension has become so complex. The need for processing data and integrated different sources of information has become so complex that we need to establish a way to interact in a partnership fashion. So path to innovation, and I think I'm concluding here. Definition of requirements and procurement capabilities are key to foster innovation in the DRM domain. So this is the answer to the title of the presentation. So if we are to foster innovation, we should think of defining the requirements and procure capabilities. R&D, they're very important. They are finalized to close technological gap, but they are functional to respond to market needs, to the end user needs. And again, definition of requirements and standards, funding of capacities, R&I financing, there should be realized through a public-private cooperation and dialogue. To conclude, these slides just summarizes all that I said, that the research innovations must be coupled strictly with market deployment of capabilities and through a cycle that starts with risk assessment and capability requirements, go through ConOps and technology roadmaps, R&D and validations, procurement, capability deployment, training of the staff, operation and maintenance, where the end user feedback is fed back into the next risk assessment cycle. So I conclude my presentation here. I hope I stayed in the timing allotted, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Well, it's my pleasure to open the floor then for two or three questions. Yes.
I have one that I would address to Virginia. You spoke about Sendai and you recalled us that it's a whole hazards protocol. Of course it is. But my question is about the focal point. The problem I see with this big institution and big protocol is how to link efficiently with practitioners from different countries. And you cited that in the UK you have a focal point, if I understand it very well. So there about this focal point I have many questions, because how many focal points should we consider based on the whole hazard aspect? You have health focal point, interior or protection or civil protection focal point, defense focal point. You can have many. So how many should we have by country first? Secondly, what would be the qualification of these focal points? Either you place it close to the authorities and he's very much linked to international institutions and commission. Either you place it to your practitioners, and he might not be known by this institution. And third is the role of this focal point. I understand that he shouldn't be a decision maker. He should just organize this information. I don't know. I'm just asking how you see this problem of focal point that we need desperately, but how to find the best balance between all these parameters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Focal points have been a very interesting issue for UNISDR to address. The reason why we have a focal point that seems to work for us in the UK is that we have a wonderful piece of legislation. Before we had the Civil Contingencies Act, we had little bits of legislation all over the place, and it was very hard to know how to bring them together and to make sure we weren't failing. What they have done is to bring together Category 1 and Category 2 responders, Category 1 being all the emergency services, Category 2 being a lot of the industrial, telecommunications, sanitation, water, whatever. And it's been a really important change in how we've thought, and this happened in the early 2000s. It was by doing this that when we did our National Risk Register, we realized that we needed different government departments to lead on different things. So the government department that leads on heat, as we're all a bit hot here, is our Department of Health. And through that, our Public Health England, which runs the heatwave plan. But the group that leads on flooding, because we need so much on flooding, soft and hard defences, is our Department for the Environment. But you say that they're all over the place. They are. But what we have is the fact that they are coordinated. And they're coordinated through our Civil Contingencies Secretariat that sits in the heart of the Cabinet Office that reports directly to our Prime Minister. And our National Risk Register has to be signed off. Our National Risk Register has to be signed off by our Prime Minister. They sign it off to make sure that we know what happens at the highest level, how we work internationally, but most importantly, how we deliver locally through our local risk fora. And it's those that are the magic solution, where they bring in all the networks of the scientists, the police, the fire, the ambulance, the healthcare provision, all the networks right at the front line, right down to you and I, who might clean the drains to reduce the risk of floods.
Thank you very much. Well, this is really a key question. We have made a lot of attempts in the past to links to this national coordination board, national platform. And it's quite difficult, and I think it's also key for us to relay information about relevant research, because they are direct customers. So there is certainly a mechanism to be found to coordinate better our links with national entities.
Philippe, can I just respond to that?
Yeah,
it was at their request that the Civil Contingencies Secretariat asked for how we could bring all our scientists together. Because we have a government office for science, but we now have the UK Alliance for Disaster Research. And this brings together all the networks of our scientists who feel that they want to engage to make sure that if we have a problem where we don't have an expert sitting inside the network of who we know, we can find them. Very useful when we had a little problem in Iceland with a volcano. We had somebody who had just completed their PhD on the volcanic ash from that volcano.
Thank you very much. Another question? Yeah.
Thank you, Philippe. My name is Phil Waters from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate. And I believe we met before, Paolo, one time in your office maybe, or I met someone from EOS, maybe it wasn't you. This question is kind of directed to you, though. One of the things you talked about was public-private cooperation and partnerships, and we're all about that. However, oftentimes governments don't have the resources to dedicate, certainly to all of the capability gaps that first responders might have. So my question is, when industry takes a look at what capability gaps are out there amongst the practitioners, or as we call them, first responders, when might you decide to develop or what would it take to develop a solution, or you know, on your own without that resources or funding from the government?
Yes, I think that for the industry to develop solutions from scratch without relying on a specific contract is a huge risk. It's a huge risk. So of course, it's different if you already have a product and you don't need to develop anything, and you just approach the department who's in charge of protection, and you try to sell it saying, okay, we can adapt to this and that. But as I said, I mean, it's what we think is that the level of complexity is increasing in such a way that probably in the medium long term does no longer feasible. I mean, it's you say, how do we can interface better with the client, with the end user? I think that actually the United States is a pretty easy case for us. I mean, you have the Homeland Security Department, which is dedicated overall. I mean, it's to this type of risks, which we do not have in Europe. So the approach we are taking, for example, if you look at the cybersecurity domain, I think that provides in Europe a good proxy on how we can proceed. In the cybersecurity domain, has been established a contractual public-private partnership between industry and the public sector. We have member states which are involved. We have industry. We have the European Commission. And it's a long journey, but it allows to define what the gaps are. There are several lines of work on the research and innovation agenda. So I mean, it's a way to bring together the end user, the Interior Ministry, or the police representative with the companies. And by the way, I mean, so on that organization, there are all the IT companies in Europe. And so I think that could be a way forward in this sense. I mean, I don't know if I answered your question. I hope so.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paolo. Well, one last question, and then I'll free you to some fresh fruit juices, because I see that you are all cooking like me.
Hello, this is Maria Klimathianaki from DGRTD. I come from the Health Directorate, and we work a lot on preparedness for epidemics. And in our field, the question that arises more and more often is the issue of the European autonomy. It was touched upon by Dr. Venturoni, but my question will be addressed to the whole panel. And the question is if in the current global context, when we have a US that is becoming more and more territorial, let's say, should the issue of autonomy be higher on the agenda of things we have to look in Europe? And it is related to research, because we have to be sure that research that is being implemented in Europe and produces results, we should find a way to take it all the way through to the final product, so that the IP remains with Europe. Because what we see many times is that research begins in Europe, but then at the final stages, it is being taken over by other places, by the US, and then we lose the IP. And for issues that have to do with preparedness, that could be another risk that we should foresee. Thank you.
Well, this is a delicate question and straightforward. We would like to get this hot potato. Stefan, well, you are inspired. I feel you.
perhaps not directly today. I mean, what I said when I stood up there, you know, it's always about global relevance and consensus. I mean, things that we can agree across the world and we come together and there is this will and we see the benefits when everybody agree. Of course, we should do it together. But then certain area, it's impossible to get consensus. And that's where we start to get perhaps more autonomous. I'm not sure if you can add to that. I represent the consensus view here, but it's
a fascinating question. I'm not sure I can answer it easily. But to me, it is more important that we undertake the research and deliver useful, usable, and used products than be very concerned about IP. Of course, we need to be concerned about IP and ownership, and of course it's important that where we can make sure that those individuals who actually do the initial thinking should be recognized for it. But to us, in this world of disaster risk reduction, disaster risk management, and climate change adaptation, we have to work together as a team. And the delivery for you, me, and all of us of better science, better communication, better understanding of the risks, better knowing of what to do is so important that I'm not so concerned about IP, I'm more concerned about effective outcomes.
Well, Paolo, you want to?
Yeah, very briefly. European autonomy is a concept that has been reiterated over and over by the Commission. The way we see it is that if we are to, I don't want to say to build, but at least to reinforce the European security market, this is an element that should be taken into consideration. I mean, it's if Europe wants, if there's the political will to maintain a certain degree, I mean it's across the board on everything because it's factually impossible. But if we are to preserve at least some critical technologies for the European security, I think it's an issue that it's going to be important to address seriously.
Thank you very much to the three speakers. I would like to make a break now. Well, I give you 2 minutes more because I think that you have suffered a lot with the heat. And we reconvene at 4:30. Thank you. request joining.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Well, after it will be more relaxed because it's delegated to other DGs, so it's...
Ah, right, okay. Yeah. Who's running it tomorrow morning then?
Tomorrow morning, DG Echo with Laura.
Because Nasira can't come in the end.
Sorry?
Nasira
is coming.
No, she can't.
Ah, she can't.
She sent me an email. Laura told me as well she can't open. So I think.
And everything is alright? I will call you. I think that in this case you will be here.
Yeah, sure.
So if you can take care of the opening,
I think possibly Laura will say a few words or something.
And then, well, we give it to the other. And then in parallel, while the other session is on the I think it will be safer for me.
Yeah, sure.
Because, well, I just arrived to a good sharing of work because in the last events.
Yeah, I know. It's just you, just telling. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And now it's very good because it's growing into the push for an EIP, and so I will be asked to develop that before the Security Research Conference in December. So it's good. If I can still have, I would say, I still give me 2 years to do it. And then in 2 years I will decide whether I continue or whether I do like you and stop and
Yeah.
You will come back to
Yeah, sure. I mean, I still live here anyway, so I mean, it's not. I don't really feel I've left Brussels.
So that you wish to stay senior.
Yeah. We'll see. No, because I want something less stressful and less full time. That's what I want. I don't really want to stop activities, but I don't want the whole management. 61.
Well, so you might, if you like, you could continue, but then it's a choice. I think I will make certain I can go until 61 actually. And stop if I want, but I will not have my full pension.
All right. Yeah.
So I will maybe have to stay 1 year more, but I will really decide at that time.
But you can also do this part-time thing if you want.
It's really a question about quality of life.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Time is running and the brain is still functioning, but the physics is a little bit tired every day.
Yeah, and I just found also this unit in CoC is enormous, 60 people plus consultants. It's too much for one person to manage. So I decided, no, it's time to do something else.
François, tu es bon? Okay. So we will reconvene. Please take your seat. And it's my great pleasure to invite William Harrison, who is, I think, everything now is clear technically. So William, the floor is yours. To guide it to practitioners and users' perspectives.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all here, and it's a great pleasure to be able to be. Let me just take these off. It's a great pleasure to actually be here to be able to understand the concept of disaster risk response and how security connects into it. A lot of people, when we look at security, we don't see the connection at times between disaster risk response and security. But if I tell you this little story, once when I was the Chief Security Advisor for the UN in Philippines. Now, Philippines is prone to a lot of typhoons and cyclones. So we have to go and deliver disaster response to them and humanitarian response. But sometimes we have to go through village B to get to village A. And when we do that, the people in village B who's just been affected by this cyclone quickly understand, why aren't we receiving this same benefits as village A? And because of that, eventually what happens is that the people there stop the trucks, unload all the stuff, and now we've got a big security problem on our hands. Now, that's where I'm really happy to see that we've been talking about, let's not work in silos. Let's work together, because that's what it's all about. Now, I can tell you, we are an end user of some of the research that has taken place at the courtesy of the European Commission. And it's great, because let me just show you a quick video. Hopefully this works. I don't think it's going to work. Maybe. Oh, here we go. So we'll go back. My technician at the back there, he'll make it work for me.
Hello?
Hello? I need help.
Are you okay? I can't understand.
It's an emergency.
Who is this? Hello?
When a crisis happens, people urgently need information to make informed decisions. They also need to report their situation and request assistance.
In such situations, traditional communications channels are often limited, and crucial messages are often lost.
IOM, the UN Migration Agency, in partnership with Centric at Sheffield Hallam University, introduces SCAN, a digital tool that harnesses new media technology to provide effective communication for IOM staff and security officers worldwide, as well as enhance situational awareness during a crisis.
SCAN helps IOM staff to be aware of potential risks with reliable real-time news and advisories regarding relevant security situations and warnings. Clear your travels. SCAN's trip interface makes mandatory reporting of travel details easier. It also improves emergency response as officials compare your itinerary with your actual location.
Stay safe. Send your status and report a situation using photos, videos, and audio messages, enabling security teams to check on stranded staff members, stabilize injuries, and move on to other urgent cases. Enable more effective response. Feedback from field staff is used to improve response and provide timely headcounts during an incident. The SCAN dashboard creates a digital situation room in IOM headquarters, 24/7 operations center, and regional offices providing real-time security reports. IOM Security Operations Center validates and responds to incoming information and alerts on the SCAN dashboard. Using this information, a fully detailed incident report can be created in minutes.
SCAN is being used by IOM staff across the globe, offering a secure lifeline for staff through their mobile device. With SCAN, UN agencies could protect their most valuable resource, their staff, wherever they may be.
And that's what we forget at times too. When we do respond, we forget about our staff. We forget that they need to be protected as well when we send them out to these situations. Whether we like it or not, the security challenges that we face globally are increasing. And as a result of that, we have to send our staff outside, for want of a better word, the wire, into more dangerous locations than we ever did before. And that goes for a number of us that are here. Even in a disaster situation response, we need to send our staff to some dangerous areas. SCAN has been put together, as it said, as a result of research that has been done here, but also as a combination, as Paolo was saying, there is a process. It's not as if we just woke up one day and said, let's have SCAN. No, it took over 2.5 years for us to decide what we needed to do, what we needed to have on the system, and we needed to see how we were going to do it. And that's what SCAN turned out to be. It's not just an app. on the telephone. It's a system. And as was been described before, there's a whole lot of hoops and hurdles that we have to jump over to get into it. We have to look at the privacy issues for our staff, because we need to protect their privacy. We have to look at the data protection issues that surround a situation like this or a system like this. We had to look at training of staff, which was very important, as Paolo said. It's something that it's a whole system. And as I said, or as the video said, it's something that we have been, that we have 24/7 coverage on. And we do have live people at the end who sit 24/7 in our operations room monitoring this situation. At the moment, we're just beginning to roll this out into operational areas. It has been mega tested as part of the process. We tested it in Libya, we tested it in Syria, we tested it in Iraq. We've also tested it here in Brussels, in France, in Paris. So it's not just limited to high-risk duty stations. It needs to be a broad brush approach. And that's what we're doing with that as well. We're also, at the moment, I think it's 1,368 staff have already been put in place. One of the biggest deployments of this scan is in Cox's Bazar, where we are responding to a disaster made by man as well as environment. So we are getting responses in that. We have something like 200 people of our IOM people on the scan. And it becomes very, very efficient for them and effective. As I said, it's not just one of these things that we need to look at in respect to just pushing it out there. There's a whole lot of things we have to do. Connectivity was one of the biggest problems that we had. How do we connect people up in a place like Libya? And when you need to send out a message of, I need help, it's something that you need to be looking at, and if you don't have any connectivity, then it becomes a big, big problem. Not only for the person who is trying to get help, but also for people like myself as the Director of Staff Security, trying to get help to these people. I need to know where they are, they need to know that help is coming, and so we need to be able to generate that kind of response for them. As I said, we're sending our staff more often outside the wire, the safe wire, and it needs to be, that's what our life is all about now. Research has become very, very important, especially on the technology side. How do we harness technology? In the old days, VHF radio, HF radio were adequate because they were mainly the other things that were there. Now we've got these things. Everyone, doesn't matter who you talk to, has one of these. And we need to utilise this, connect it with a system so that we can respond to our staff. So that's what we've been working upon. And I want to say it's more than just an app. Centric, Sheffield Hallam University, have done a lot of research on the whole system, on how we connect up to this, to one another. On this particular, the application on the phone itself, I could take a photo here right now. I can put a message on it, a bit like WhatsApp. I can send it off to my 24/7 radio communications area, and they'll know exactly where we are, what we're doing. And it helps the same thing. If you're going to go to a disaster and you want to send information back to the disaster management control, you can do exactly the same with this. Just take photos and send live data back to the control where decisions can be made. So it becomes very, very important that we've got it. Working in silos was one thing that I really like to hear. Coming from the UN, we tend to work in silos. Doesn't matter what it is, because it's all this information, we want to keep it together. But I come here and I listen to what we're talking about here, and you can see that those walls need to be broken down and are being broken down, which is really great to hear. And I'm going to try to take that back to the people on the other side of the lake. Standardisation does not mean harmonisation, which is a very good point that I heard from one of our colleagues before, which I think is very, very important as well. We need to standardise a system like this so it can go global, so that not only the humanitarian aid workers use it, but also we've got our NGOs could work it, our other partners can use it. It can become a very effective tool when it comes to a situation such as an earthquake response, when the UNDAC teams go out and they respond to all the needs that are needed there. As I said again, it's a system that's a full system. It's complete. It's complete with the fact that that legal side of things had to be sorted out first. It took us over maybe 18 months to go through the legal situations, especially with the data protection. How long do you keep the data for on the tool? How long can you keep it for? What do we do with it once we've got it? It's got geolocation, so if you're on this thing here, you can press a button on this and it can say to you, you're okay or not okay. When you press the not okay, automatically a message goes off to our comm centre, and they will notify me, and I will be able to look at my screen, and I'll be able to now pick up that person and find out where they what they need to go. So it's a great tool. It's great to be an end user of this research that has gone forward. And I hear that a lot of people, there's a lot of research that does take place, and some good ideas are out there. However, they seem to stop at a certain level, whereas this one has managed to go on. I don't think... What we've learnt also, what was said, there is a need to continuously test this. And the beauty about SCAN is that it doesn't stop here. Development of SCAN will continue. I may go on and I may need more kind of features on, and I can bring that off to Sheffield University and Centric and say to them, this is what I need. So there's that combination of practitioner, developer, research, practitioner, and end user, talking to one another about getting the final product that we actually need. And like I said, this product will never end. There's a lot more things that we can actually put on this that will help us all become better deliverers of either disaster response or humanitarian aid. I think I'll leave it at that because it's very, very hot up there and I'm sweating. Sorry, just one other thing. It has the feature on here has got geofencing, which means that I can actually, if I need to, I can actually cordon off an area, say in Afghanistan, for instance, to make sure that none of my staff actually go into those locations. And if they are, if the vehicle or someone does go into that location, that automatically alerts me to try to find out why. The person could have been kidnapped, the vehicle could have been hijacked, and now I know where that person may be. So geolocation is very important. One of the main features of SCAN, though, which is good, you can turn off the geolocation. And that's part of the privacy issue. A lot of people used to think, well, if I'm getting, for want of a better word, tracked all the time. Everyone's going to know where I am, what I'm doing, what restaurant I'm at, how long I've been here, and all this. Well, most probably could, but as part of the policy, we can't. We make sure that the data only stays open for a short period of time, which is 2 weeks, and then it's disregarded or made anonymous. So, apart from that, that's all I want to say, because I'm getting hot, like I said, and I want to get off the stage and let someone else get up here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, William. Well, we will now terminate this day with a very important aspect, which is access to information, and Ian Clark will tell us something about what is being done by the Joint Research Centre and DG Home in this aspect. Well, Ian, the floor is yours. Do you have slides or? Yes.
So, good afternoon, and so my name's Ian Clark, and yes, I work at the Joint Research Centre, where I'm in charge of a unit called Disaster Risk Management, which for us is very much related to security. In fact, we're located in a directorate called Security and Migration, and also Space, and we brings, of course, many links with migration and disasters, cybersecurity, critical infrastructure, and these race-related issues. At the same time, there are, of course, many links with climate adaptation. So we also address forecasting relating to climate adaptation in the same group. And in fact, earlier on, Johannes Luchner mentioned some of the tools which the Joint Research Centre has developed on flood forecasting, forest fire forecasting, and general disaster forecasting. Well, many of the same tools, the same staff, the same models are used for more long-term forecasting in relation to climate change. So that shows in many ways how these different issues are in fact related. But what... Sorry, I've gone backwards. I want to talk to you today is more about... Yes, I hope the mouse is still alive. It's killed. One of the knowledge tools which we are developing together with colleagues to try and bring the results of science and also demonstration projects closer to the users and practitioners and those working in operations. And this is one of the services which is provided through the Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Centre, which was mentioned earlier, and which I'll talk about in a bit more detail tomorrow, and some of the other related issues in relation to partnerships, many of the networking activities, innovation, where we're working particularly in the area of data, trying to use artificial intelligence, plus in the area of risk assessment. But in the area of trying to bring knowledge together, we have developed what we call a project explorer to try and pool the different results from research and, as I said, demonstration, also pilot projects together, a whole variety of projects and different ways of searching. And it's also a tool which can be used across different platforms. So the community of users, for example, has its own particular website with different issues related to your work, but it also has a direct link, for example, to this Project Explorer through that website. So the idea is to have a repository of information which can be used in different circumstances and also by very many different organizations. So that's the idea. It's still very much at a pilot stage. Information is being included, and it's being tested, and we're also very interested in finding out what people think of this. So there's information by types of project, information also particularly by country, by organization, and also the different links between organizations. So if, for example, there's a consortium set up for a particular project, you can find across the links, the locations of these different consortia and their links, and also cross-links between different projects that different consortia are involved in. What we are trying to assess are, as I said, research projects, and we've gone back to FP7, but not any further back. And because, of course, some of those projects still go ongoing. Horizon 2020 projects, then what we call the DG ECHO projects, which are prevention and preparedness projects run through the civil protection mechanism. Some work that the JRC has done using its own resources, which these are mainly scientific papers or also software tools which have been developed. And then more recently, we also have projects under the LIFE program, which covers environment and climate change, demonstration projects, which are also sometimes related to disasters. So the idea is to try and bring together all the disaster-related projects together in one particular area. And as you can see on this slide at the moment, 1,380 projects and a large number of organizations. It is also a possibility, and we hope in the future, to include national projects, also in the future better labeling of the projects. Also, there's more detailed information in there. You can export sorry, move on. Yes, I mentioned that. You can export the projects to Word or to other tools as well. And here we see one of the actually problems related to research. There are often links to websites, etc., in projects or in summaries of projects, which are now dead because the projects are finished and the websites are no longer maintained. And this is really something I think where we see, and you can see this across many of these projects when you research on them. When you do a search, you can get to a project, you get to a website, and suddenly, blonk, there's nothing there anymore. So that's, I think, something to think about, how to keep projects alive once the project is really finished. Now, what I wanted to try and do is try and show you some examples of the projects, if the mouse would work, to actually, because we're online here. Ah, thank you, yeah. No, it's still gone. Ah.
Maybe the mouse needs a little carpet.
Doesn't like that either. No, I'm afraid it doesn't like this surface. Ah. Well, it's a bit difficult to use, but what I wanted to show you, so there's all the projects have come out, but you can then look at them by funding organizations. I've already mentioned the ones which were there. These are at the moment by DG. And then you can, sorry, this. By funding program. Categories, so crisis managed security systems, lots of others as well, sometimes, because it goes all the way to, from cybersecurity to biodiversity for certain types of flood projects, for example. You can look at cost range. So you can really find a lot of different information. And then you have maps as well, so you can see. This shows you all the different locations, and you can go on to different research institutes, and you can see how they're involved with across organizations, 2 organizations here. So, I mean, it really gives quite a lot of different possibilities to actually find information and then use it. And as I said, at the moment it's limited only to EU research and demonstration pilot projects. As I said, if countries are interested in putting national projects in there, or if they're interested in using this, just using the structure for their own national purposes as well, this could be arranged so that the whole structure of the database could be adapted to national purposes. It's really kind of a multi-purpose tool which we're happy to find different ways of exploiting this and to serve the best purposes. And we could go further and actually go down to the investment projects, but at the moment it's staying rather at the limited research policy interface. So I think that's all I wanted to say at this stage, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Sorry for the IT problems, it didn't work quite as I expected.
Thank you very much, Ayan. Well, I will open the floor actually to your speech and to William's, if you have any. Well, I would like to make a little comment on what you have mentioned, that we are actually working, as you said, very closely together with mapping of different programs. And just to tell you that we did that for FP7 projects, and we did that for the Horizon 2020, 2014 and 15 calls. And just to inform you that by the end of the month, you will have a report which will be covering not only all the overall Horizon 2020 for 2014 and 15, but also ISF capacity building. And our contract and Decoris is now busy in complementing this with 2016-17 calls, also with capacity building, Life Plus, ISF, Interreg, ECHO. And the aim of that is not a pure exercise of mapping, is to really identify those projects which are contributing to different themes. And it's not a coincidence that this week you have a lot of different themes that have been defined, and we want to ensure that in a given theme, we will not miss any research projects which are funded by different programs, because we are in a difficulty to identifying them, but also capacity building, because we don't make a link between research and capacity building, and we don't make at all a link with education program. So this links research, capacity building, education has to be established, and it's only through what you have demonstrated, Ayan, we have shown, this mapping and explorers, a searching system that will be able to do that and help you to find information and to bring that together. So it's really an ongoing project, ongoing development that we hope by the end of the year will be culminating in something operational. So, well, I speak too much, so I open the floor for questions. Yes, please.
Yeah, I have a question, Monica Buscher from Lancaster University. A question about, that cuts across both talks, really. It's about digital ethics. The European Data Protection Supervisor's Office has just released an expert report that argues that we really need to augment the general data protection regulation with a digital ethics approach, because many of the things that it suggests, like purpose binding, for example, are kind of going against the potential of the technology. Of course, there are very good reasons for doing data minimization and data purpose binding, but to really use data a lot would be difficult under those circumstances. So one of the things that the first speaker mentioned was about the ability to say, are you okay or are you not okay? And that's actually very difficult, a very difficult question, where is okay, not okay, stop. But, sorry, the question that I'm working up to is there room for practitioner-led definition of topics for the DRM-KC report for the next round on things like human reasoning in connection with artificial intelligence and digital ethics as an example of a topic for that report?
For that particular report or for wider reports? Because, I mean, we put out for that, just perhaps everybody knows, so we produced a report in 2017 that Virginia mentioned Science for Disastrous Management and new ones being prepared for 2020. I mean, we put out a request for topics and for contributors, which is pretty well closed now because we need to try to organize it. But I mean, we're still open to other things may be able to get in at some stage. I mean, more widely on artificial intelligence and the ethics, the JRC is producing a major report this year on this whole topic of, but not related to disasters, but artificial intelligence in general, in terms of how it is being already used, for example, across the JSA in many different areas, and the whole question of ethics and so on, and how it should necessarily be regulated in a certain way. So, I mean, that's a major report that's coming out at the end of this year. And there again, we're looking for contributions.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, a question here. Thank you, Claudia. Here.
Hi, Carol Cunningham with representing Department of Homeland Security First Responder Group. For the lecture on SCAN, I was curious if the technology had the capability of allowing someone on scene to identify the responders around them. And the situation I'm thinking about is if your comm center were to be disabled and responders that were on scene had capabilities of search and rescue or emergency medical care or whatever, they would be able to switch that on and actually help the people that are around them or are affected by an adverse environment.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. It's yes, it can. It actually can do reality kind of recording. So we can actually show you what's going on. This information is then taken back, straight back into the operations centre. And from that point on, decision making can be made as to how we're going to respond, what we need to do, etc. So there's a lot of that, there is that capacity there. It has been continuously being developed, mind you, and that's what it's all about. So hopefully that answers your question. Just on the first question there, the data protection and privacy issues have been modelled on the European concepts and policies. So we've actually taken that into consideration. When it comes to artificial intelligence, we only use that in the analytical side of SCAN, where we try to identify the potential threats that may be coming down the track so that we can actually respond to those as well and have a better picture.
Thank you. More questions? More comments? Yes. I'm coming.
When working on this project that you mapped nicely, and it's really a tool, and we can really see the advantage of it, we always wonder who is going to read all the deliverables that we produce, and not to mention who is going to exploit it. I think it's beyond any human capacity to do. So my question is simple. Should or is this foreseen in the future as a development to try to link the repository with some functional summary? And you can define functional summary the way you want and as extended as you want. But for the moment, I'm not sure, except if you tell me that you did it, but I'm not sure that this is available. And it would really complement nicely this sort of static repository, very useful, but probably lacking in this exploitation of data that are produced every day, every month, every years by project. Some useless, I agree, but some very interesting, and we lose this as much as we lose the website. This you commented upon. So my question is, if this does not exist, wouldn't it be useful to propose it officially to new project, starting project, to have a structure, well-formatted, functional summary, between brackets, to be defined, to plug with this repository? Thank you.
Ian, while I will also respond.
Certainly. Yeah, I think this is very, really vital. But my understanding is that under...
Microphone?
Yeah, it's okay. I understand that, I'm not sure it's under Horizon 2020, but there are certainly fact sheets that should be prepared at the end of projects. And one thing, because I mentioned the JRC work that's on there, all of those should have, perhaps I need to check, but I hope, should have project summaries on, because we do prepare these science for policy summaries for all the projects that we work on using the JRC resources. So those should have short summaries on there. If they're not, then we may need to make sure they are on. But that's certainly something, and I think it's a priority for the Commission.
Yeah, indeed, well, what you are telling is a key issue also for this community building. And what is we are not first starting from scratch, but we have a lot of things to do to arrive to your point. And the first thing was indeed knowing what we have in hand. So when you are building a puzzle, you need to know which are the pieces, and you put them together. And then there is a kind of understanding mechanism to how to look at this puzzle in a way. We are not yet at this point. That is, we are now learning, and you remember that when we started the community of users 4 years ago, we were believing that we should have a much more horizontal approach to regarding communication. Thinking that we should have a kind of broad view on security, crisis management, and so on. This was a wrong concept, and I'm the first one to realize this now. We are all working in silos. We are all working thematically. So if we want to reach people working, for example, in flood risk management, why should we mix them with drought, storms, whatever? We need to come back to thematic discussions, but here we should not miss any opportunity to bring to the different actors, policymakers, scientists, practitioners, industry SMEs, relevant information on any kind of projects which are funded at EU, national, and even regional level. We are far from this, but when we will have this picture, that is bringing this project together, research, capacity building, education, then we'll be very strong, and alliances will be built up. Now we are all scattered. We are ourselves generating a competitiveness, a competition between projects. So you are not keen to work naturally together because you are in competition. But the Commission has the duty to facilitate these bridges between different projects because we are funding these projects and we have to tell you, well, it's okay, you have IP, you have some classified information. We cannot touch on that, but you have some work that can be shared. Let's sure that we will have a mechanism that will work. And what the DRNCAC is doing goes in this direction. We have to make it practical and concrete, and we are not yet at this stage. This is clear. But and your recommendation is very, very valuable for Horizon Europe. It's something that we could indeed envisage to really secure the fact that when we have projects funded, there is a duty for them to bring forward this. It goes along a fact sheet, but maybe a little bit more than this. Yeah. Yeah. More comments? Yeah. Please.
Yes, thank you. I have a piece of the puzzle, and maybe you have a solution, because in the Darwin project, we work with resilience management, and our concern, it was this to have only deliverables, but we have a wiki that is quite popular, and we have both air traffic management and healthcare, because they wanted to learn from each other. And this type of functionality is something that you can integrate in the what is it? In the Project Explorer.
Yeah, well, I can. Yeah, certainly, and I know the DRS7, I would say clustering impact, and there are obviously recommendations that can be integrated in Explorer. This is clear, but I would like to say, because I followed your work on guideline development, which is very valuable with respect to the substance, but there is something a little, I would say, missed opportunity when we are dealing with research aimed to support policies. You know, for example, here, if you are speaking about a resilience guideline supporting, for example, the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, you are developing this with several projects, and you arrive with something which is
very, very solid at the end of your project. And then you think that you will send that to DG ECO and that they will take this over to bring this to the member states and name the member states. But here, the misconception is that the policy work does not work like this. We are at Commission level, we are indeed in connection with member states, committees, and to make a product issued from research recognized at policy level, it needs to be anticipated from the very, very beginning of the projects. That is, when you are starting to develop guidelines, well, we are speaking about, for example, harmonized guidelines, you need to include your clients from the very beginning. And your clients are the policymakers. It can be industries, it can be practitioners. If you don't do that, you arrive at the end of the 6 months, at the end of your project, you have a fantastic document. You bring this to the practitioners, to the policymakers, thinking they will take over. But I heard, I will repeat this anecdote again, I heard a firefighter telling me, well, look, it's fantastic what you did. You have, I'm a Fiat 500 driver, and you are proposing me a Ferrari. It's too expensive, and I do not have the driver license for it. So it's where we need to improve the way we are preparing the ground for potential users of these guidelines, of the guidelines. So here, typically, what you have done is a very nice work. It will be difficult to bring it to the policy circle because we need to have, again, a contact with the DG ECO, for example, and convince them to say, please inform the member states. And I know that, I'm telling this to you because I've been in this situation as policymaker, and a research product took 1.5 years to become a policy guideline. But it took actually a lot of energy to bring the policymakers from the very beginning on board to the project. So it's something that we have to learn together. It's not a criticism, it's simply that the practices, the jargon, the way of working are very different in science, in policy, even in innovation industry and practitioners, and we have to clarify how we can better work together. Yes.
And I discussed this with the boss of DG ECO just before he left. That was the same question, and it was not addressed here. It's how to interface end user with this policymaker. You improve the situation a lot by the CoU. Should the CoU be the one-stop shop for those who want to contact someone in the Commission, the Santé, DG ECO, GRC, whatever, home, but home we have contact with you through the H2020 project. But what would be the best interface to be sure that those who develop something or those who have ideas to produce harmonized guidelines, to take your example, how to contact this policymaker? We don't know them. Now we start knowing, recognizing some faces because they come over and over, and conversely, they start recognizing some of us who attended regularly this CoU. So it starts to be more like an individual point of view. We start to know some of these people. It is not structured yet. So how to make it functional should be a special guichet where we can address our request and say, we would like to discuss with a policymaker from DG ECO with this idea. How would it work? Because for the moment, this CoU is the start. Everybody is happy with that. It's a fantastic initiative where people can meet and discuss. It is not yet a functional tool where we know exactly how to reach someone in the Commission, and Commission is very, very wide, and for us, it's like a mystery tour, you know, it is really something like, we do not understand who is there.
We are very mysterious.
Yeah. So see, what would be the best interface in the future if this CoU needs to evolve to something functional?
Well, I can only respond in a very pragmatic way because we are working on it to make it in a way institutional. But I don't want to say anything yet. But we are really trying to make it a sustainable platform that will deliver what you are telling. But Rome has not been built in one day. So we have. You remember that 4 years ago when we started, we had actually, even ourselves internally, not a direct connections to different policy DGs. We have built this at the beginning. And then we have started to say, yes, this is the first step, but we need now to figure out how we can bring policymakers, scientists, practitioners, and industry together. We spoke about these 4 actors. And the 5th dimension, we still did not touch it, which is a citizen dimension. We are working on that. It's very, very complex. In 4 years, we have already succeeded to have people coming to this forum and discuss, exchange. And now, the difference in comparison to last year is that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, you will see people responsible for different thematic areas taking care of the discussion sharing. It was not the case 2 years ago. Tomorrow you have DG ECO speaking about disaster risk resilience. On Wednesday you have the extreme climate events. You will have DG Climate, you will have DG Environment. 2 years ago we were not at this stage. So we are progressively bringing people aboard in such a way that it is now becoming a usual practice to share and to avoid, in a way, taking a little bit of risk here. And it's why this place is fantastic, because it's not by coincidence. It brings actually a kind of freedom of speech. If we would be all in our positioning in a position of fonctionnaire, speaking only about the field and not, I would say, thinking out of the box, we will not be here today. So now we are really trying to ensure that ideas will flourish so that we are per theme ensuring that what you are saying becomes true. It takes time, and I think it will take, it's a new paradigm, it's a new way of working that we are developing together, and we cannot do this like an instant way. Well, it is in fact part of the already the speech that I wanted to do with respect to perspectives, because it's really about connecting people. It's true that this little animal, you know, this is, when we speak about connect, we speak about this. But connecting for me is connecting with people. Last week I saw again a movie which may be a little bit found simplistic, which is Avatar. And in this film, you know, they are speaking about the connection of trees and all the different people, well, the different humankind, animals, trees, and so on together. And there is something which is, I connect with you, I see you. With this, I don't see you. I connect, but I don't see you. So we need to see each other and to work together. And this is actually bringing back the human into this kind of discussion. So I think it's something that we are all enjoying here, but we need to do something which is not yet, I would say, sufficiently established in terms of mechanism, is how to link the international level. We had UN examples, UN, EU, national, regional, and even local, in such a way that we are all belonging to this kind of network. And we know that even if I'm working in a little town, I'm affected by flood, I know that there is some, I would say, mechanism which makes that research is trying to respond to my need in terms of prevention preparedness. And I can express myself if I have something to say via some channels. So establish this very clearly. We don't have this. We are all disconnected. And last week, I had a kind of argument with a guy saying, okay, well, it's because of the fact that we are far from citizens that we had Brexit. I said, no, no, no. First of all, Brexit has happened because of lies to people and because of maybe a poor communication from the Commission. This is clear. But it's not because we do not have activities and projects that are supporting the citizens, the societies in Europe, that we had the Brexit. It's because we were poor in communicating. This is a difference. So we have to improve our communication, and we have to ensure that when we are building this picture, everybody is feeling, well, that is participating in this picture. Otherwise, why should we build Europe? Yeah, please.
Oh, hello. Hi, Jaime Abad from BRGM. I had a question for Mr. Clark regarding the Project Explorer tool, which seems to be a very important and necessary tool to continue to access European research that has been produced. He mentioned at one point the case of lost websites, and a lot of these websites are project deliverable repositories, are where you would go to access all of this information. I would like to ask if something is being done to recover and to make these resources available. And I can present an example of a very tragic case of a project which was lost. If it's possible to show you on the computer, if you're interested.
We all know about projects which have been completely lost. We know, I'm an old crocodile at the Commission. I started with a second framework program, and there are research which would be very useful for Horizon 2020, that from the second, third, fourth, even fifth framework program that have completely disappeared. It's because of this lack of repository. And so the repository is one thing. The way to use this the repository is another thing. And when you speak about a terminated project, we need to ensure that when a project is terminated, website is dead, we need to have an executive summary, and it's what Jean-Luc indeed mentioned. We need to have a snapshot about what has been done and who is the contact still, I don't want to be nasty, but still alive, you know, a network of organization that can still provide information to someone who to get details. Because we can hardly do more than this, you know, provide actually something which says, we have developed this new alert system, you know, which is working. Maybe it is commercially available, maybe it has been tested and so on. Here is a contact. It's what we can do. And when a project is ongoing, we trust that on the website, you will get this information. Otherwise, it's very difficult. You know, we have, I don't know how many projects we have. We cannot maintain the information, but we can have a kind of modus operandi, which says, okay, that it's clear that for terminated project, we will ensure this repository of executive summaries. It is growing in this direction with CODIS, CODA, but it is really, there is a lot of work to be done to be credible, because Explorer will be useful if you, as a researcher, find the info in 3 minutes. If you get guided into what you are willing to find in 3 minutes. Otherwise, you will go to Google. So we have to be better than Google, much better than Google. And guiding this through, I would say, categorization of themes, ensuring that the keywords brings you to the different projects per the themes that you are searching, and going to, I would say, not only the information about the substance, but also who are behind. Because when you have 20 projects, for example, on earthquake, you will find out who is working in Italy, in your country, in France, in Germany, and maybe you will say, hey, but I know this guy. And it's obvious that you will contact a guy in your country more easily than a Greek researcher. So, but you can't do that because you are, we are disconnected. So we are trying to develop all this system in such a way that it will become easier in a way, but it takes time.
Thank you.
Hello, Bernardo Espinosa from Catalonia and UPC. I want to recover your first question from the session about the extra deliverable or something like that. No, I think it's related to the links and also the capacity building at the end of the life of the project. I have this curious position in the project of innovation manager that is trying to bring the market something that has no price and is not tested. And so there's a part at the very end that is really hard to handle without being considered on the funding and the project. So I think that for future calls and the fundings should be considered some way that is reasonable to get involved the companies that will eventually take over or the customers that will eventually take over in an openly way. We know it's public funding, but it's partially funding, and there's this common interest for innovation projects. I think should be a mechanism that is clearly focusing to that.
Jean-Luc could speak about this in the CBRN area, because we are we have in a way the father founder who is here, Michel Bosco, who are about this kind of networking, clustering of, I would say, supporting both to SMEs that are developing innovative solutions that needs to have support to bring their solutions to the market. And very often the SMEs are a little bit lost in this respect. So it's a kind of coaching activity. It's to say, okay, well, we will help you from the very beginning. You have a team which is developing the solutions, but you have to anticipate. Again, anticipation is also related to policymakers, I would say, usability of information, but also for innovation. From the very beginning, we need to figure out what will happen in 3 years. And what is the strategy to make that this solution is brought to the market. If you don't do that while you are developing your research tool, fantastic. And then 6 months before the end of the project, you are terrified because you need to report, because you want to get your money from the Commission, and you are losing completely sight about the promotion and I would say, the links with the real innovation that is with the potential industry and SMEs. So I think it's what we are testing now is indeed there is a clustering activity called maybe Encircle, which is bringing a board of people which will help new research and innovation action coordinated by SMEs from the very beginning up to the end and bring them to have their solution in the market. This is in the CBRN. And I think, frankly, if it's worked, because it's something very new, we need to really test that. We will have some feedback next year. If it works in Horizon Europe, we should do that in other fields, because we need to have this coaching, this kind of solidarity, because SMEs have hardly access to I would say, the innovation circus. So, and we know that. Yeah, it's very complicated. And again, it's how to bring people together to make sure that it's known, developed in such a way that it is attractive for the industry SMEs, and that the market is well prepared to receive these solutions. But, wow, a lot of work. But, well, we are progressing. We are turtle, we are not, it's not rabbit? Well, what is the hare, exactly. Not yet. More questions, more comments? Well, if not, I would like to thank you very much for your very interesting exchanges. With respect to perspectives, you have understood that this week will be very dense with different, more disaster-related discussions. As I just said, there is a big difference in comparison to other events, is that they are chaired by really the different orders of the theme, for example, DG Eco, DG Climate, DG Environment, DG Research, and so on. And that we are preparing the ground for the December event and a big security research conference that will take place in Brussels on the 5th and 6th of December with a large exhibition area where we want to invite as much as project as possible. Well, we have been told that we could expect 800 people, we'll see, but it might be the case. So, but it's not only the number which is important, is the process of bringing these thematic discussions in such a way that it becomes very visible and consolidated groups. We spoke about CBRN, we spoke about extreme events, we speak climate events, interoperability. We need to have constituted groups that are formed involving research representatives, policymakers, scientists, practitioners, and so on, and ensuring that there is indeed a connection with existing projects to get the substance of this project well, I would say, visible to other stakeholders, and bringing back this information down to the different countries and organizations. So it's really multidisciplinary, multisectorial, so it's horizontally, and vertically from EU, well, even international, EU, national, local, and back to the top. So it's, we have started bottom-up with the community of users. It's because we have started bottom-up that it worked. It's because we have all worked together as a kind of very, very
open-minded discussions about different actors, that it has worked. Top-down, it's always a little bit complex because people want to have their touch without mastering necessarily all the realities of the work. Now that it's coming back to the top, we need to squeeze actually the system in such a way that the top-down and the bottom-up are reconciled, so that there are decisions that are taken at the top, which set mandates to different constituted working groups that have to deliver, provide recommendations to different sectors that will then be usable because they will be endorsed at high level. It's a turnover, but it is something which I see very clearly because I worked like this in a water policymaking circle, which was much more simple than the security one. But we have everything in hand now to do it. So, well, I invite you to be very active in the discussion during the week. December will be a very exciting event, and in 2019 it will be even more exciting, I think. Thank you.
Philippe, c'était very juicy. On voulait te le souffler, on vous squeeze. C'est very juicy. Oui. Very, very.
Philippe, moi demain je ne serai pas là parce que je dois aller voir la salle pour l'exposition de justement des séries et que j'ai dû travailler jusque là. Je ne sais pas me dire